Hello there. Every mini event spread from the nation's federal capital Abuja by the great players of the different sectors of the nation's landscape every second. What we do on this program, therefore, is to relieve those critical issues and happenings in your living room. This is Abuja Dispatch, and I'm your host, Adegoyega Arogoto. Let's start off with those stories that made up our news headlines in the Abuja week.
President Muhammadu Buhari on Thursday in Abuja advised diplomats in the country to stay within the limits of their schedules and not intrude in the internal politics of the country as countdown to 2023 elections begin. At the presentation of letters of credence ceremony held at the State House, the president called for the support of the envoys in tackling rising global insecurity and strengthening of communality, adding that many are living in unprecedented times and with so many uncertainties with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, the rise in global insecurity and the devastation of the environment caused by climate change, among other threats. On the regional level, the president said Nigeria will continue to work with other member states of ECOWAS and regional blocs to deal with the problems of terrorism, trans-border crimes, banditry, maritime issues, and unconstitutional change of government. The Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, has officially presented the documents for the establishment of two new universities in the state to the National Universities Commission. These are the Lagos State University of Science and Technology, Ikorodu, and the Lagos State University of Education, with campuses in Ijaniki and Ekpe. The governor told the university's regulatory body that as a major cardinal pillar of the themes agenda of the present administration, education and technology is regarded to be the single catalyst for sustainable empowerment for the teeming youths residing in Lagos megacity state. He said the best state university in Nigeria, the Lagos State University, has been developed to a world-class standard, and after extensive engagement with stakeholders, it was clear of the need to give birth to new institutions which could create the right environment for the youths to benefit and compete favorably with their counterparts anywhere in the world. The NUC, however, charged the state government to bring on board relevant courses into the new university's curriculum so as to make the future graduates remain relevant to societal changes. The global investment environment is gradually regaining its momentum after the interruption by COVID-19. Acting Executive Secretary, Nigeria Investment Promotion Council, Emeka Ofo, who disclosed this in Abuja, noted that with the continued disruption by technology and the adaptation of government through policies, new opportunities are emerging. He said the 2021 investment announcement report indicated that $23.30 billion was tracked, representing about 39% more than the value tracked in 2020. Ofo stated that the increase in value is indicative of the growing adaptation to the global new normal after the economic disruption occasioned by the restrictions imposed to check the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. The acting executive secretary sued for collaboration to ensure that Nigeria attracts the quantum of investment required to stimulate sustainable socio-economic development.
Welcome back. The National Assembly had recently reworked and expunged the provision for the direct primaries from the Electoral Act. The President had pointed to this as his major reason for withholding his assent to the Electoral Act Amendment Bill 2021, which will have made electronic transmission of electoral results possible, among other features. As Nigerians await this all-important presidential signature, to be or not to be, that remains the question. Stay with us on this line.
In any democratic system, an adequate legal framework has been recognized as a prerequisite for credible, free, and fair elections. The challenges with the conduct of elections in Nigeria since 1923 till date include, among other things, irregularities that put the entire electoral process in doubt, problems with the legislative framework which puts constraints on the electoral process, the inability of various stakeholders to play their roles, lack of independence of electoral commissions, thuggery and violence, and monetization of politics. One of the ways that have been used to address these challenges is through the Electoral Act. The Electoral Act provides for the structure of INEC, its powers and guidelines for registering voters, procedures for the conduct of elections, the registration and regulation of political parties, electoral offences, and the determination of election offences.
The only electoral bill that will be acceptable to Nigerians is an electoral bill that either enjoys the consensus of the lawmaker, passing provisions that answers to election transparency and credibility. But anything that will not guarantee consensus should lead to division and voting on the floor of the two chambers, so that Nigerians can know who voted for what. And this is a global parliamentary tradition.
On return to civil rule in 1999, the first Electoral Act was passed in 2001. This was revised in 2002, 2006, and 2010. Indeed, there has always been an attempt after every election to amend the Electoral Act to take care of the deficiencies or mischief noticed during the elections. After the 2015 elections, there were attempts to amend the electoral law with the introduction of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill to, among other things, make the use of card readers legal, but the president withheld assent due to some drafting issues and the fact that the amendment was too close to the elections. There is another opportunity to amend the Electoral Act and correct the deficiencies and mischief noticed during the 2015 and 2019 general elections. The Electoral Act Amendment Bill 2021 makes provisions for card reader, clearly forbid members of political parties from taking up employment or appointment in INEC, defines overvoting clearly, and makes provision for electronic transmission of results. But it also makes provision to delete the provision for the conduct of indirect primaries and the nomination of party candidates, and making direct primaries compulsory for all political parties.
If a provision allows INEC to do everything discretionary, but says one thing INEC cannot do is to transmit results electronically, it means that someone somewhere has planned to rig the 2023 election.
Because of the provision of direct primaries for all political parties, President Muhammadu Buhari withheld assent on December 22, 2021, giving several reasons after receiving informed advice from relevant ministries, departments, and agencies. Among other reasons, the president noted that the compulsory direct primaries, which lead to the increased cost to political parties and INEC to conduct direct primaries in 8,809 wards across the country, make life difficult for small political parties, overstretch security agencies, violate freedom of choice by political parties, and give rise to litigations.
It is not the business of any political party as to how another political party decide to have their candidate in the first instance. And for the electorate, I think what they should look forward to is for political parties to come out with the best candidates that they have. Now, if a political party refuse to put up a system that will guarantee the best of candidates for their party, it is at the expense of that political party to have a candidate that will not be voted for. In essence, if a political party should feed a candidate that is not popular or that is not acceptable to the electorate, they have other contestants in other political parties. And those parties will feed candidates that could be better than the candidate that fails to bring a good candidate. So to me, it pays political parties to produce the best candidate, which can be done not just through the direct primary election. You can use the indirect primary election, or you can even go ahead to do consensus system.
In view of many, party primaries is a non-issue. The real issue is the transparency and credibility of the process, whether it is direct or indirect. The weightier issues that need to be addressed by political parties are internal democracy, using the transparent process where members and structures of the party take decisions without imposition and conducting party matters without resorting to thuggery and violence. From theory and practical experience, the mode of primaries, whether direct or indirect, is not an issue, and the National Assembly seemed to have done the needful by removing the compulsory direct primaries and sent the bill back to the President for assent.
The President of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, promised us, and he has assured us, that he supports credible elections, that he would leave an electoral legacy that is better than what we have. What does it mean? It means that what we currently have is not what the president wants to leave.
The pulse of the entire polity suggests the need for Mr. President to now do what posterity will remember him for by assenting to this all-important bill. That way, the positive provisions of the bill, especially on the card reader, strengthening of INEC, overvoting, and electronic transmission of results, will be implemented in 2023 elections.
Thanks for staying with us. The several dynamics of the Nigerian economy have attracted our attention since last week. This week on Split Views, we take on the second and concluding part of the interview session with the financial experts and public affairs analyst, Olawale Oluwade. Stay with us again. You know, you just mentioned something about the country's debt profile and you know how it has been continuing to increase and all that. But for the executive to really execute the 2022 budget with all its infractions, you know, of course there must be some borrowing, as it were. Now, or are there other options to finance the budget expeditiously, you know, without increasing the nation's debt profile? Any other options?
Well, with this current administration, the answer is no. But of course, best practice, global best practice for developing nations, Nigeria happens to be in that category. The best strategy to funding developmental, projects, infrastructure, you don't use resources that are always going to be scarce, So you don't use scarce financial resources to build projects that will last 20, 30 years, Some of these projects are long-term, To build a railway probably will take 10 years. I mean, how long has it taken to construct a 120-kilometer Lagos-Ibadan expressway? It's taken only God knows, maybe 10, 12 years, They've been on it forever. So what you do in that situation, what developing economies are advised to do, by multilateral organizations, is to adopt the PPP model, which is public-private partnership model. That is, private sector individuals bring their resources, bring their money. You concession maybe a road, 100 kilometers, 100 kilometers, a railway line or power station or gas station, or it could be anything. It could be a bridge, it could be whatever. You concession it. It could be a port. You concession it, to private sector, people. Not the kind of concessioning we did with our energy sector that has become moribund. Because that was just like a parceling away of our national assets to people who didn't have both the capacity nor the resources. But here we're saying the global best practice for developing economies is to look out for private sector, expertise and resources, to build this infrastructure, and then they man those infrastructure to recover their funds and their resources, eventually hand it over back, to the federal government. That way, you are able to free up much needed resources for social development issues. What are these? Education, healthcare, housing, security, and all of that. So in this year's budget, like I said earlier, there is a deficit of 6.25 trillion, and the federal government is proposing to bridge that gap through new additional borrowings, and then there are already approved borrowings by the National Assembly, so they will draw down on those, and then privatization, which is why I talked about, though it's not so much like PPP. Privatization means you sell off some of these assets that are non-performing. You sell them off, or like the PIA now, NNPCs become privatized, even though technically the federal government still own 100%. It would be nice if the federal government could sell off substantial shares in NNPC, so that you raise money. I'm telling you, Boyga, if Nigeria needs to raise 20 billion, 30 billion from the sale of shares in NNPC, we can do that. Now this money will be plowed into, some of this long-term infrastructure that we need. So the borrowing mix is through privatization, borrowings, new borrowings, to further increase our total debt stock, which though on paper may not be worrisome, because our debt to GDP is still within reasonable levels, about 30% or thereabouts. But that is not the problem. We've said it over and over again. The problem Nigeria faces is a debt to revenue ratio, because we're doing way below 7% debt to revenue. Now, the OECD average, of debt to revenue is about 15%. Any debt to GDP, any nation that wants to, revenue to GDP, any nation that wants to experience quantum leap, massive growth, should be having revenue to GDP of about 12 to 15% on an annual basis. Nigeria is doing less than 7%, and this is way too poor, for this economy, and there are embedded opportunities locked within this economy that if only we had, smart people, I love to use that phrase, smart people manning not just the economic affairs of the country, but even the overall government architecture, it would help. But, as it is, it's just going to be, this 2020, like I said, this 6.25 trillion deficit would increase our overall budget exposure, debt exposure rather, and, heighten some of our fears, myself inclusive.
Now, the PIA has been in operation now for some months. How will you rate the application of this act by the critical stakeholders of the nation's oil and gas sector?
Well, the PIA is a welcome development. I was on a number of TV channels to talk about it, and I said it's been long overdue. It's an executive bill that has been in the National Assembly for over a decade, and because people benefit from the opacity in the oil and gas sector. Now, this is a sector that is so strategic to our national health, our national security, our national economy, because more than 80% of our foreign exchange earnings comes from, the oil and gas sector. So you would have expected that. The reforms in this industry would have been done, way before now. But better late than never. So it was passed August 16th. It was passed last year, and the president assented to it August 16th. Fine. Now, the challenge is in the implementation. And one of the things, the critical issues in the PIA is that it envisages or it mandates a total deregulation of petroleum product pricing. So the issue of PPRA is no longer there, meaning prices of petroleum products will be determined solely by market forces. Now, the danger in that is government claims they subsidize, petroleum products because diesel, I think there's total deregulation there. But PMS, which is what, affect the lives of everyday Nigerian, because they transport themselves from their places to place of work, they travel and all of that, that's what we use to run these small generators and all of that. So if you're going to remove in one fell swoop, like the federal government said, because the PIA said within 6 months, there should be total removal of subsidy and then market forces should determine prices of PMS. Now, this is meant to come in February 16th, which is from August 16th, that's 6 months. Now, if that were to happen, what is the systemic shock that it will create in the economy? There's going to be, inflation is going to skyrocket. I just told you earlier when we started, I said, look at the prices of commodities, food and commodity, transportation, electricity, everything is going to be affected. And of course, labor, went up in arms and said they're going to shut down the economy because the sufferings of Nigerian masses are going to be quadrupled or quintupled, and that's the fact. But I'm glad, that calmer heads seem to have prevailed on the federal government for the first time. Well, let me not say for the first time, but at least in a long while, this administration seems to have listened, to critical voices and backed down, backpedaled on this subsidy removal, the implementation of the wholesale implementation of the PIA and all of that, But it will be remiss of me to end my comments on the PIA and the oil sector if I don't say, while we're having this crisis, Boyga, we talked about it, you and I, and I've talked about it on other TV channels. It is because of our corruption and ineptitude in the management of our petroleum refineries. Why should we be talking about petroleum subsidy, fuel subsidy? Why? Because we're importing finished products. We export crude that we have in abundance, we export it, and Nigeria is the only oil producing country anywhere in the world that exports crude and then re-imports finished products. No other nation does that apart from Nigeria. So we have 5 refineries or 4, and not any of them is functioning or optimally functioning. All of them are functioning, way below capacity, way below installed, production output. And yet people are there, receiving humongous, astronomical, salaries and benefits and all of that. And so these refineries have been, returning losses upon losses, decades after decades. So that is what has brought us to where we are. Yes, there seems to be a silver lining in the horizon in the Dangote refinery. But I've also said, I'm a risk manager, so I've also said, why would a nation depend on an individual? Because Dangote is a private businessman and is into business, to make profits. So why would we depend on an individual, to meet our energy, local energy consumption needs, So government is talking about, we'll do modular refineries. And let me ask, even if it's rhetorical, this government is in its 8th year, almost in its 8th year. By May, it will enter into its 8th and final year. Why did this government have to wait until last year, 2021, before they thought about rehabilitating the Port Harcourt refinery? And from the timelines they gave, that by so and so period, maybe sometime mid this year, it will begin to function at 30%. All of those, no updates on all of those. And they about $1 billion or $1.2 billion, earmarked for that rehabilitation. I screamed my head off then that it was just going to go. A huge chunk of that fund is going to private pockets. But we'll see how it goes. So that's what's responsible, for the debacle in the oil and gas sector with the PIA, the subsidy, and all of that. But I think, or I hope, when Dangote refinery comes on stream, there will be some level of sanity in the sector.
Finally, let's just wrap it up. The 2022 budget is the last to be completed or executed by the present administration. But there are fears in some quarters that there will be a shift to, politicking towards the 2023 elections, and therefore efficiency may be compromised in terms of performance. Are you of the same view?
No, I am not, and the reason is simple. Yes, in most democracies, even advanced democracies, the last year of the incumbent government is usually termed lame duck, meaning, investors, business persons are not looking to that government with any level of seriousness anymore, because any deal or business ideas you propose to them, they do not have the time, either to engage seriously with you or to execute and implement those deals. So you're waiting for the incoming administration. But in our case, in this particular scenario, it is incumbent on this government to ensure, there's massive capital releases for projects and policies to be implemented. Why? Even for their own safety, for their own selfish reasons, because if rather than abate or reduce the sufferings of the people, that's why, like I mentioned, alluded to, the reason why, the fuel subsidy was shelved is not just because they were, open to superior arguments and whatever. It was also because if you do this going into an election year, it's so easy. You've sold the election to the opposition. So I believe it is incumbent on them to release. I presume, Boyega, I may be wrong, but I expect that there will be massive injection of funds into the economy. So whatever businesses you are into, SMEs or medium-sized businesses, I think just position yourself to get a slice of the cake, because I anticipate that there will be prompt releases and massive releases also, into the economy.
Mr. Olawale Oluwade is the Chief Executive Officer of Growth Masters Consulting and a public affairs analyst. He has been our guest tonight on Speed Views. Thank you for your time, sir.
You're welcome, Boyega. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
In a very laconic expression, the basis for this sitting is to ensure we share love equally across the family that is called Nigeria, willed by three ethnic groups, the Yorubas, the Igbos, and the Hausas. We have to believe that there is no majority in Nigeria between these tribes. Despite the differences in population across board, we have a belief that we are conformed by our ethnic values, by our cultural richness as a nation. We equally have a belief that when a father has a family, all the three children must have the right to the values of the home and must be shared with abject equity. We support the Southern, to come to power, and we believe it must be shared rationally and appropriately.
That is how far time can permit us tonight on Abuja Dispatch. For marketing details and advert placements, you can contact us at the Lagos Television Abuja Bureau Office, number 78 Rapshoden District, Central Business District, Abuja. And for your comments and suggestions, you can reach us out on any of our various social media platforms. Thank you for sharing your precious moment with us tonight on Abuja Dispatch. A week from now, we bring you another refreshing episode. Same time, same station. Adewoye Igaro is my name. Have a good night.